In Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse 10, the Bible says, "And he sent and beheaded John in the prison, and his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship and to a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities." I want you to consider these verses because they say something to us about how to deal with those moments where we feel like we are close to the edge. We may not have committed a heinous act as we have seen in the news, but all of us know what it's like to just be at a point of frustration. All of us know what it's like to have those moments where you think if someone just says one more thing, if someone does one more thing, we have been overwhelmed, we've been frustrated, we've been on verges of breakdowns, we've been ready to snap. Thankfully, something within us allowed us to restrain ourselves and not express our emotions in such a tragic way. While our hearts certainly go out to all of those victims and the victims' families, within us there must be some level of concern for individuals who do not know how to address their anger, their frustration, and who act out onto others something within themselves that has not been properly addressed. When we look at this passage, there are some things we can see, we can learn, we can appreciate that helps us when we have the potential to be close to the edge. John the Baptist and Jesus were not just two biblical, and I hate to use the word characters, but two biblical individuals who coexisted at the same time. They were actually relatives. I think it's lost on people sometimes when they consider that John the Baptist talked about he was not worthy to tie Jesus' shoes and how he paved the way. And we see so many elements of their ministry that people forget John the Baptist and Jesus were actually cousins. Given that fact, we see that John the Baptist is beheaded at the request, when you have to read Matthew chapter 14, and we started at verse 10, but if you read verses 1 through 9, you see a request was made for his head. As he was beheaded in prison and news gets to Jesus, can you imagine the anguish, the horror, the emotional turmoil that Jesus and his humanity felt, knowing that not only was his cousin dead, but he died a tragic and unjust death? Can you imagine after word gets to Jesus what it's like to hear that not only did your cousin die, not only was it tragic, but he was actually beheaded, his head placed on a charger and given to a damsel who had requested it? Can you imagine? And maybe you don't want to imagine, but in the humanity of any individual getting that kind of news about their family, I want you to appreciate the human response to such a tragic news, because I want you to see how Christ responded and how we can better deal with those moments in which we are overwhelmed, we are frustrated. The first thing we see Jesus do is experience solitude. In verse 13, it says, "When Jesus heard of it, He departed thence by ship into a desert place. When you are experiencing something that's overwhelming and that's frustrating, take value in solitude. Solitude allows you to process your reality and to prepare for a proper response. When we are overwhelmed and frustrated, we have a tendency to have knee jerk reactions. We have a tendency to just be outright reactionary. Solitude allows you time to process, to take in what's going on, and to better prepare yourself to respond to whatever it is that has angered you or frustrated you. In solitude, you get to experience and express emotions privately that you may not need to express publicly. You may need to scream. You may need to hit a pillow. You may need to go outside and run in circles. You may need to do whatever you need to do to experience and express your emotions in solitude. Solitude allows you to settle yourself from the noise and the distractions and the needy people. And all of us have people in our lives who are VEPs, not VIPs, VEPs, very exhausting people. There are so many people who need so much of your time and your attention. And when you're frustrated and overwhelmed, you need to settle from the noise and the distraction and very exhausting people. Second thing we see here in verse 14, the Bible says, "And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude." He first goes to solitude, but second, he sees other people. The reason I like this is because even though you need those moments of solitude, you can't stay in solitude. You can't stay withdrawn. You have to be able to see other people, because when you don't see other people, you stay wrapped up in yourself and consumed by your problems and your pain and your emotions. Christ saw other people. He had compassion on those he saw. And that's a very moving point, because the Bible says he was moved with compassion on those he saw. When you develop empathy and compassion for other people, it is a benefit and it is actually therapeutic for you, because when you don't see other people, you will project your pain or your negative emotions onto other people. So seeing them and developing empathy for others is actually therapeutic for you, even in a time like this where you just got some bad news. The third thing that I want to leave with you on this concept is that Jesus not only had his moment of solitude, he saw others, but he also served others. The Bible tells us in verse 14, he healed their sick. This is a wonderful concept to consider, because we have to learn how to do for others. We get consumed with ourselves, what we want, what we feel, how we think, and what everybody should be doing for us. But serving others is tremendous therapy in helping you to not go over the edge. When you serve others, you start to realize how good you have it. And when you serve others, you don't have time to wallow in your pity and in your misery. Listen, I recognize that we all get frustrated from time to time, and we get overwhelmed. Take a note from Jesus. Have you a little time for solitude, but don't stay there. See other people so that you're not consumed with yourself, and serve others. You'd be surprised at how much better you'd feel. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister.